Welcome to today's deep dive. If you're the kind of person who constantly seeks out multiple perspectives and, wants to gain a thorough understanding of the world without feeling bogged down by information overload, you are in the perfect place.
You really are.
This specific deep dive is custom tailored for you. Today is Wednesday, March 4th, 2026, and we're looking at a brand new 2026 research paper published in the journal Social Science Research.
Oh, it's fantastic paper.
It's authored by Joanna Syrda, and it's titled Gendered Reporting of Housework Across Relative Spousal Income. Our mission today is to explore an age-old domestic argument, basically, who actually does more chores around the house?
The eternal debate.
Right. But more importantly, we're going to examine how the exact same household reality completely changes in the scientific data, depending entirely on the gender of the person answering the question.
And that's exactly why this is such a phenomenal piece of sociological research. We so often assume that survey data, especially when measuring something as seemingly quantifiable as hours spent doing the dishes or folding laundry, represents an objective reality.
Yeah, we just treat it like hard math.
Exactly. But the source material we're examining today proves that even when counting those simple, everyday hours, human ego, identity, and these deeply ingrained societal norms just warp the numbers. It serves as a masterclass in how internal psychology fundamentally alters the external data we produce for the scientific record.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to really grasp what this new 2026 paper just discovered, we should probably first establish the baseline.
That's a good idea.
There is this massive 30-year debate among sociologists regarding how couples divide chores, especially when their incomes differ. And the source material outlines two competing heavyweight theories at the center of this debate. What is the first theory we're looking at here?
Right, so the first is called economic exchange and bargaining. This originated with a researcher named Becker back in 1981, and it's a purely logical, math-based framework. It essentially models a marriage as a rational economic marketplace.
Okay, a marketplace.
Yeah. The core idea is that the partner who brings more financial resources to the household inherently possesses more bargaining power. Furthermore, their time is technically valued higher in the labor market, meaning they have a higher opportunity cost for spending time on domestic labor.
So the logic dictates that the higher earner uses that financial leverage to simply do fewer chores. Like if you make the lion's share of the money, your time is better spent working, and you effectively buy your way out of scrubbing the toilet.
Precisely. It views human behavior through a strictly rational, gender-neutral lens. Whoever makes the money avoids the mop.
Makes sense on paper.
It does. But human beings are rarely perfectly rational economic actors,
Yeah.
which brings us to the second competing theory the paper investigates.
And that would be the gender deviance neutralization theory. This one introduces a pretty significant psychological layer.
It really does.
It suggests we aren't just calculators. We're humans with deep social conditioning. My understanding of this theory is that when couples deviate from traditional societal norms, specifically when a wife out-earns her husband, they experience a psychological threat to traditional gender roles.
That is the core mechanism, yes. To compensate for that perceived threat, couples actually overcorrect and reinforce traditional roles at home.
Interesting.
So the female breadwinner might start doing more chores to subconsciously signal that she is still a good traditional wife, despite her non-traditional income.
And conversely, the husband does fewer chores to restore his sense of traditional masculinity, just steering clear of what society historically codes as women's work.
Exactly. It predicts the exact opposite outcome of the logical economic theory. What's fascinating here is that researchers have been arguing about which of these two theories is actually correct for over 3 decades. This debate dates all the way back to a foundational 1994 study by a sociologist named Brines.
So for 30 years, scientists have just been analyzing different data sets, running complex regression models, and arriving at completely conflicting conclusions.
Yeah. Some studies seem to definitively prove the economic exchange theory. Others seem to definitively prove the gender deviance neutralization theory. It has been a massive, unresolved puzzle in sociology.
But Syrda's new paper reveals that for all those decades, researchers have been missing a massive hidden variable. They were intensely focused on the numbers, but completely failed to account for who was holding the pen when the survey was actually filled out.
Which is such a wild oversight when you think about it.
It really is. Which brings us to the data itself and what we might call the phenomenon of the phantom choice. To figure out who was actually right in this 30-year debate, The researcher utilized a massive data set called the Panel Study of Income Dynamics, or the PSID.
A very famous data set.
Yeah. She analyzed thousands of heterosexual married couples over a timeline stretching from 1999 all the way to 2023. But the PSID has a very specific quirk in how it conducts its surveys. It uses a rotating respondent design.
And that methodological quirk is the key that unlocks the entire mystery. The PSID doesn't interview both the husband and the wife every single time. One year, the surveyor calls, the husband answers, and he provides the estimated chore hours for the entire household.
Right.
Then a few years later, the surveyor calls, the wife answers, and she provides the estimates for the exact same household. We get to see how the exact same couples are described differently depending solely on who happens to be on the phone.
And the numbers that come out of this rotating design are incredibly telling. It's almost like roommates inflating how often they take out the trash.
Oh, absolutely.
So when wives self-report, they state they do an average of 14.06 hours of housework a week.
A solid baseline.
But when the husbands are the ones answering the survey on behalf of their wives, the husbands report that their wives only do 13.27 hours. The husband just casually shaves off nearly 45 minutes of her domestic labor.
He just vanishes it, and the discrepancy grows even larger when we look at the men's hours.
It really does. When wives report for their husbands, they state the men do 6.14 hours of chores a week.
Okay, 6.14 hours.
But when husbands self-report their own labor, they confidently claim to do 8.75 hours a week.
Unbelievable.
Right. Men are essentially giving themselves over 2.5 hours of phantom credit every single week. They're magically materializing chore time out of thin air when they're the ones talking to the surveyor.
It's a huge jump.
Are we assuming these men are just lying to make themselves look better?
Well, the sociological literature emphasizes that this isn't necessarily conscious deception or malicious lying. It's a well-documented phenomenon known as social desirability bias. When people take a survey, they are not unfeeling tape recorders playing back literal facts.
Right, they're human.
Exactly. They are engaging in a concept that sociologists West and Zimmerman famously termed doing gender back in 1987. A survey is a performative space. When that husband is on the phone, he is unconsciously attempting to align his answers with his internalized idea of what makes him a modern, egalitarian husband.
He wants to present a version of reality that feels socially acceptable, something identity-affirming.
Precisely.
And the wife is presumably doing the exact same thing when she's on the phone.
She is. She filters her responses through her own internalized expectations of fairness, domestic responsibility, and marital harmony. We all constantly narrate our lives to fit the roles we believe we are supposed to play.
So the survey simply captures that narration rather than the physical reality.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because those 2.5 hours of phantom chores are just the surface level. The researcher didn't just look at the raw hours in a vacuum. She mapped how those reported hours changed as the wife's income went up relative to the husband's.
And this is the brilliant part of the paper.
She discovered that the relationship between income and chores completely bifurcates depending on who you ask. We end up with two entirely separate data sets. We have the wife's reality and the husband's reality.
And those two realities are fundamentally incompatible when viewed side by side.
Let's examine the wife's reality first. When women are the ones filling out the survey, their reports flawlessly track with that purely logical, math-based framework, the economic exchange theory. The data draws a clean, predictable line.
A straight, logical line.
Yeah. The more money a woman makes relative to her husband, the less housework she reports doing and the more she reports him doing. If she brings home 70% of the income, her chore burden decreases and his increases. In her recorded reality, the marriage functions as a rational partnership where domestic labor is divided based on economic contribution.
That is a perfectly logical economic outcome, but when we shift to the husband's reality, the economic logic completely evaporates.
It just disappears.
Completely. When men are the ones filling out the survey, their reports follow the gender deviance neutralization theory. When the wife's income is relatively low, the reported chore division looks somewhat standard.
But as her income goes up,
Yeah, as it approaches his, and specifically when it hits a critical tipping point of about 45 to 55% of the total household income, the husband's reporting behavior radically shifts.
that tipping point is crucial because it represents the moment they're essentially at income parity, or the exact moment she's just starting to out-earn him.
Exactly. According to the husband's answers on the survey, as his wife crosses that threshold and becomes the primary breadwinner, he reports doing less housework, and he claims his higher-earning wife is doing more. It creates a highly distinct U-shaped curve in the data.
A U-shape.
Yes. The moment he loses that primary breadwinner status, his reported chore hours drop, directly contradicting the economic theory.
So when she gets the promotion and becomes the main financial provider, he suddenly tells the surveyor he's doing fewer dishes.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to examine the psychology of masculine overcompensation. The source material draws on deep sociological literature to map this out. Masculinity is socially constructed to be significantly more fragile and much more heavily policed by societal norms than femininity is.
That makes sense.
Traditionally, a man's identity has been inextricably linked to the role of the economic provider. When a man loses that breadwinner status, it triggers a profound psychological threat. It initiates masculine overcompensation.
He feels an unconscious need to reassert his masculinity.
Yes. And in the context of a household, he accomplishes that by rejecting tasks that society has historically coded as feminine, such as cleaning, doing laundry, or cooking. So when he's on the phone for the survey, his internal narrative downplays his involvement in those chores to protect and reaffirm his gender identity.
While the wife doesn't carry that same psychological baggage regarding earning money, women face far less social stigma for out-earning their partners.
Earning more doesn't threaten a woman's fundamental identity in the way that earning less threatens a man's traditional identity. Therefore, when the wife answers the survey, she doesn't experience a psychological imperative to spin the numbers.
She just calls it like it is.
She simply reports the raw economic reality of the household exchange. He makes less, so he does more of the laundry. That is her truth. His truth, however, is heavily filtered through the defense mechanisms of his ego.
So what does this all mean? If you're listening to this, you might be asking a very critical question. You might be wondering about selection bias. What if the men who happened to answer the phone for the survey just happened to be lazier guys overall?
It is the classic vulnerability of observational data. You have to ensure you are comparing apples to apples.
Right. What if we're looking at two totally different pools of people, and the men who pick up the phone are fundamentally different from the men whose wives pick up the phone? To solve that, the researcher utilized a highly specific statistical methodology called fixed effects alongside double-demeaned estimators.
Which sounds incredibly complicated.
It does. But if you want to visualize how a fixed effects model works, just imagine placing a hidden camera in the exact same kitchen, observing the exact same married couple over the course of a decade.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
You observe their actual physical behavior. Nothing in the environment changes. The only variable you alter is who you hand the microphone to when it's time to describe what just happened. You hand the microphone to the wife, she tells one story. You hand the microphone to the husband, he tells a completely different story.
To build on your camera analogy, the double-demeaned aspect of the math means the statistical model subtracts the household's average chore time over all those years, and then it subtracts the individual's average chore time.
So it strips away all the background noise.
Yeah, their total wealth, their education levels, whether they have children. It isolates only the delta, the specific change in reported hours caused by the switch in who is holding that microphone.
And the data set allowed for this level of precision because 24% of the households in this massive 24-year survey actually switched respondents from one year to the next.
That's a huge sample size for that specific behavior.
Right. 1 year, the husband provided the data. A few years later, the wife provided the data. The math isolated the exact same couples. The physical house was the same. Individuals were the same. The only element that shifted was who was speaking to the surveyor.
And the mathematical proof is undeniable. The moment the respondent changed, the reported chore hours magically shifted to fit those gendered biases.
It's just wild to see it proven mathematically.
The husband suddenly started taking credit for more hours overall. But crucially, if his wife was out-earning him, his narrative shifted to that gender deviance neutralization curve, minimizing his chores. The statistics prove this is not about different types of men. It is about how the exact same men narrate their lives differently than their wives do under the pressure of income disparity. This raises an important question, and it is perhaps the most critical takeaway for the scientific community at large: the sheer danger of pooling bad data. For 3 decades, researchers have been taking all these surveys, some answered by men, some answered by women, and aggregating them into one massive data set.
Assuming a household is just a household.
They operated under the assumption that a household's answer was an objective household answer, regardless of who provided it.
But if you pool all this data together without separating The husband's answers from the wife's answers. The math turns to mush.
You are taking a logical, straight economic line from the women and a U-shaped, ego-driven curve from the men and averaging them together into a misleading blur. The gender of the respondent is not merely a piece of metadata to be filed away in an appendix.
It's an active ingredient.
It is an active, powerful mechanism that literally shapes the recorded reality. If researchers do not account for who is holding the pen, their scientific conclusions about human behavior are going to be fundamentally flawed.
It changes the entire foundation of how we look at sociological studies. To summarize the key takeaways for you, the listener couples do tend to distribute chores based on who makes more money. The economic logic is present and real.
Definitely.
However, the story they tell about those chores, the data they report to the outside world, is heavily distorted by fragile gender norms. The male ego's psychological reaction to a female breadwinner completely changes the way he reports reality. When his traditional role is threatened by her income, he unconsciously spins a narrative that minimizes his participation in feminine-coded chores to protect his masculine identity.
It serves as a stark reminder of the vast chasm between what we do and what we tell the world we do.
That is exactly why this deep dive is so relevant to your daily life. The next time you're reading an article quoting a statistic about human behavior, whether it's about domestic labor, screen time, or exercise habits, remember this research. Data is not an infallible truth that falls from the sky. It's generated by flawed, performative humans. On a more personal level, the next time you get into a debate with your partner about who does more around the house, keep this conversation in mind. Neither of you is a perfect, objective tape recorder. Both of your brains are constantly, unconsciously spinning narratives to protect your identities and your self-image. You are both experiencing the exact same kitchen, but you are living in two divergent realities.
It requires a level of self-awareness that is difficult to maintain. I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to mull over, one that builds directly on the implications of this methodology. If our deep-seated, unconscious need to perform our gender can so significantly skew how we report something as incredibly mundane and easily measurable as washing the dishes or doing the laundry, what else is it skewing? Consider the other supposedly objective data points in our lives. When we report our symptoms to a doctor for our health records, when we describe our risk tolerance to a financial advisor, or when we evaluate our own performance during a corporate review, how much of that data is secretly being manipulated by the invisible hand of our own fragile egos? How much of the factual world around us is merely an illusion built to protect our sense of who we believe we're supposed to be?